Ben Dreyfuss, welcome to the Dispatch podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jamie.
Um, I want to begin. Listeners, believe it or not, not all of them at least, may know who you are. So, if in brief, if you could just kind of describe where you came from in terms of journalism and also your ideological moorings.
Sure. I mean, I'm a Substacker now with a Substack called Calm Down, and prior to that, I was the editorial director of Mother Jones magazine before being somewhat canceled in 2020 and being moving to the island of misfit toys called Substack. I think ideologically, I'm sort of a normie lib whose main interest is in fighting my mortal enemy, the left wing of the Democratic Party. But occasionally I also am reminded that the right wing is also a traditional enemy of mine when you go far enough. But yeah, the last few years I've become more in concord with my new friends in the never Trump era. So that's sort of where I am now.
Well, normie lib is kind of what I was hoping for today. We tried to have someone on last week to talk about Kamala Harris, and it was a little bit too much as if he just received talking points in some cases from the Democratic Party. Although I like him, and we had a good conversation about boxing. But you were at the convention. You are still there as in Chicago. Just describe what you saw the last 4 days in Chicago.
It's hard to talk about it without just focusing on the vibes. Really, there's arguably it's too confident. Really, the vibe here, but from what it was a month ago when it was Joe Biden on a direct path to losing, it just seemed like people had flipped a switch. You know, there was a walking through the desert and then finding a bit of water, and suddenly everyone is quite thrilled to have found that oasis. And whether that leads to the most rational, objective review of the water is something else. But it's definitely the main feeling here was one of relief. I think I feel like everyone was there was so much anxiety in the Democratic Party for the last year at least, but really especially the month before, where people were just afraid of watching Biden speak. Even every time he went out, there was this thing in your chest that was, oh God, what's going to happen here? And then once that changed, there was just I don't think Kamala Harris is the best orator in the entire world, but she is a person who can talk, and she's a sane person, and she seems like a nice person, and she can do it all right. And there's just this huge feeling of relief, I feel, amongst people that there's this standard bearer for the party that you don't have to sort of make all these qualifications for. It at such a pure level of, oh my God, they're going to talk, and I need to be afraid.
Interesting what you said that there's this kind of euphoria there in a way. Were you at the Republican convention?
Yeah.
I wasn't, but one of the things that jumped out at me watching it, and with the JD Vance pick, was like, oh wow, this might be what a top of a bubble looks like. Like, you're so confident you're going to pick JD Vance now, and we're on a glide path to victory. The euphoria there, was there any thought like, oh man, hopefully this could be a bubble? This could be maybe taking too much in stride, that this is we now have Kamala Harris and we're going to win.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's also just that I had just been in Milwaukee, but that was my fear from the moment I got here, was that I was like, everyone is being a little too confident. It's tempting fate. God has a great sense of humor, and he always likes to send you a surprise. I mean, the last time that I remember there being two conventions where both conventions were euphoric was 2008. And 2008, when I was leaving the plane from Denver, the Friday after, is when the Sarah Palin pick was announced. And obviously that went one direction after a while, but it led to this immediate bump, this feeling on the Republican side, that I remember on the plane, all the Democrats leaving were suddenly and we're stricken with this thought of, oh my God, wait, we're not just going to win the way we had just thought we were in Denver. And so there's something about overconfidence at these conventions that just makes me a little scared. When you look, especially, like Nate Silver has it right now, like Kamala at 55% or something, which is a coin flip. It's still a little, it is worrisome to worry the parallels to Milwaukee, where it's like, is this going to be the high?
So, I mean, I back just kind of the vibes, because I mean, I think those are interesting and important. I don't know if you went out after I mean, it ended late every night, but what was the mood of the people there? I mean, was this did they switch from Biden people to, because Kamala Harris didn't do that great in the 2020 Democratic primary. Are these people now all, Kamala Harris fans when they maybe a month ago were not?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's one of those. It's sort of a hilarious on the nose example of how, like, there's the rally around the flag thing what people do with their team sports. But no, I mean, I think that you were a little gracious in the way that you described Kamala's 2020 performance. Right, it was quite not good. And then I think that there were, and even as recently as a few months ago, like the Biden White House was the main people pushing he can't step aside because Kamala, she can't win. And so there was all of that. And I think that maybe one of the things that worked out well in her favor was that the expectations were set so low by a few years of the White House having this somewhat antagonistic relationship with her. This memory of this 2019 campaign, I don't even think she got to 2020. And then also a lot of Republicans who just have never liked her and have talked about her for years. And so that everyone's expectations going into it were a bit like, oh my God, what is this actually going to be like? And then when she cleared those at all, it was this relief of, oh my God, all right. And I think that, like, what she proved really, and she's been proving for over a month, was that Biden was like a below replacement level Democrat at this point, and that she at least is a replacement level Democrat, right? Mm-hmm. Like she is doing the things that you need to do to campaign seriously and run a real campaign, and she's not shooting herself in her foot or doing insane things like she did in 2019, where she was embracing the left and doing all this nonsense. So you did have all of this, just a relief here. And to answer your question just directly, yeah, that is exactly right. Like, these people who mostly I don't think would have voted for Kamala if this was an open primary, did suddenly, they are all on board here, in a way that really was sort of the best way this could have happened for her. If there was a primary, I don't know that she wins it, right? Like, it's sort of a fascinating turn of events.
Was there anything at the convention that surprised you that you didn't expect to see when you landed in Chicago?
I had been convinced by everybody that there was going to be more left-wing nonsense, that there was going to be more protests and everything like that. When I got here last weekend, and they had been talking about 30 to 40,000 protesters. But then on Saturday night, a reporter who was embedded with them told me that they were saying, really, we're probably going to have 100,000. And, they got 1,200, maybe something like that. Like, it's off by a scale of 100. And it really just led to this. I think that also led to the relief that everyone sort of felt here, was that there wasn't going to actually be this 1968 sort of, oh God, we're going to have to justify Chicago police beating a couple of these kids into the ER.
I mean, wasn't just political people predicting this. There's a financial guy, Iceman, who, if you read The Big Short, he's one of the guys that got The Big Short in Michael Lewis's book. And now he comes on TV all the time. And his prediction was Trump's going to win in a landslide, because you're going to see burning of the American flag and the Israeli flag, and it's going to be worse than 1968. Why did that not materialize? What happened?
I mean, I think that in general, there's two things. One of which is the left in the United States is incredibly small. Like, it's over-indexed in the media, so we have to talk about them a lot. But there's really just not that many people on the far left in America. The other thing is that because they're so small, the left can only get purchased for anything ever if normie libs who are more disengaged are afraid and start to throw in their lot with them, which happened during the Trump years, right? Like, they suddenly decided that this theory of change that the left had was right, and so they threw all their support behind it, and you get a lot of ridiculous stuff. But the best way to take oxygen out of those movements is for normie libs to be confident, is to, like, have them have Obama in office when suddenly the left had no power whatsoever, and there was drone strikes, and we did everything we had to do. And basically, I think that what's happened in the last month is that group, that critical mass of normie Dems, and even ones who are West Wing viewers and a little further to the left or whatever, but they're not ideological lefties, have just calmed down. And once that happens, the left has no power. It's too tiny of a movement. And so then you end up with 1,200 lunatics who have signs surrounded by 80,000 signs that they couldn't even hand off to anyone.
Well, I was going to get into it a little bit later. I mean, speaking of Kamala Harris's speech, or Vice President Harris, I always say the name wrong, not intentionally. But that was not the 1619 Project speech. I mean, it was waving the American flag. This is the greatest country in the world. This is not kind of the left that we've been told has such power in the Democratic Party. Is it that they know they have to be marginalized a little bit, at least play marginalized in order to win? Or do you really think there's such a minor force that this is the mainstream Democratic Party that was waving the American flag on stage, and this is the greatest country in the world?
I mean, I think that the left is real. Like, it does exist, and it does have some very weird opinions about American greatness, and it does have some weird stuff that we've all witnessed over the last few years and everything like that. But I just think that in reality, that isn't a large. I mean, how many people are even in the House or in the squad? 4. Like, there's not even one of them is now moving into the center. Is moving away from it. It's just like,
are you referring to AOC? AOC,
yeah. Who DSA hates because she doesn't want to set fire to Foot Lockers or anything anymore. But I do think that that most of the people are cringe. It's the same with the Republican Party. Most of them are actually just like cringe, sort of pro-American. They like to come to these conventions and hear nice things about their country and feel strong and patriotic. But then a lot of those voices can just be overtaken by louder ones that are ideological. And the truth about the Democratic Party is it's not ideological. It's not. This whole system isn't really supposed to be. Its job is to win elections while being further to the left than the Republicans. But aside from that, they'll kill you for a quarter.
Yeah.
And the left hates that about the Democratic Party because it's not like Europe and it's not like da-da-da. And the left accurately knows that the establishment in the Democratic Party, the wing that I associate myself with, if they bring a gun onto the plane, we're not opening that cockpit door, right? The plane is being landed, but they can do whatever they want, but we're getting that plane on the ground. No one really trusts the left with it, which is why you then ended up with this thing last night where they wanted a speaker. And
you're talking about the uncommitted movement. They wanted a Palestinian talk about a Palestinian American talking about their viewpoint of what's going on with Israel Gaza.
Right. And then they released a speech of it that was really, a fine speech. The text was fine, but it wasn't, they weren't going to, at the last second, just allow the uncommitted movement to have it. And why would they? Because the uncommitted movement has shown time over time that its goal is chaos, and to let them on, in such a live television moment would be malpractice. But
it's intriguing. I mean, leading up to this, if you told me that there would be chance to bring them home in the Denver National Convention, and they wouldn't allow even a Palestinian American to come give a speech, I'd be pretty surprised. I mean, was that surprising to you at all, or am I just so my brain's on Twitter or my brain's on following Mehdi Hassan that I'm not in touch with the zeitgeist of the actual Democratic Party establishment?
I just think that if you are on Twitter and you are even looking at the media as well, because the left is so much more overpopulated on both those things, then of course it's crazy. Of course, because also, I mean, that was kind of what I wanted to see at this convention was how much of this was going to be, how many fears that I have about this stuff were going to be realized by her doing what she did in 2019, which was embracing a lot of stuff on the left that was toxically unpopular and stupid. And she, I wasn't initially a Walz guy. I don't really have a problem with him, but he wasn't my first pick. And I was a little maybe, who could know? Who could know? And then I really didn't see any of that this year. One of the benefits of the way that this happened for her, without having to have a primary, is she didn't need to run to the left to win a primary, right? So if she did run to the left right now, it would just be an act of suicide. It would just be you don't need, the only mainstream candidate who's ever run to the left for no reason whatsoever in a general was Joe Biden. There's no other point for them to do it.
Well, an interesting point, though. I mean, do you think this could reshape how we run? I mean, we're one of the longest. England, they run a campaign. They decide they're going to have elections, and it's in 3 weeks they run a campaign. Yeah. Do you think that the fact that she didn't have to pander in a primary is kind of a new format? I mean, why would we? I mean, I guess you have to have a primary in a certain way, but do you think parties will shorten their primaries to kind of mitigate kind of the pandering that goes on in these primaries?
I mean, it would be sort of amazing. It's if she wins this election, if it all works out, really, it'll be the biggest change in how these things have worked, because it's all been going one way of them getting longer and longer since 1972. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you could actually turn back the tide with it, because there's too many stakeholders in these states who want to have this massive industry of a never-ending campaign. But it will be fascinating to see. It'll be the first change. I mean, also maybe it won't work. Maybe she'll lose and we'll all go, oh, this was terrible. You can't do everything so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, back to her speech. I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, the waving the American flag. I thought the first fourth of it was really, really good about her story. Kind of the only can happen in America. Some of the other parts, you know, I didn't necessarily love, but I mean, I thought at one point that she was about to come out and say, and you know, and by the way, Tom Cotton should write in the New York Times when he, you know, like she was almost. This was again. I keep going the anti 1619, like almost repudiation. Are you seeing anything on Twitter and from writers, kind of the left of center that led a movement in 2020 that were in the zeitgeist of the moment in 2020 that are angry? Because I mean, there was almost like a complete rejection, or at least a ignorance of woke politics in that speech.
I mean, I haven't seen any in the exact date, like specifically about that, and I sort of imagine that it'll be quite tempered because they're gonna be high on their own vibes. But I have seen that happening over the last few years, as we kind of just, as a zeitgeisty thing, moved away from that. You know, I mean, as we passed sort of like the peak woke era of 2020, and it's been, you know, repeatedly, it's been sort of like beaten at the polls, but then also all of these institutions that were a little more susceptible to it have built up some immunity to it, so that there's less sort of indulging some of this wacky stuff. And I was talking to someone who was going to go do a debate with someone about cancel culture, and they were going to say, you know, cancel culture bad, and the person that they were going to debate with was a big columnist who I was like, she's still defending it. Like I hadn't even heard we were doing that anymore. You don't even see it anyone arguing it anymore. And I don't know. I think that's as opposed to like Kamala or the Democrats leading in any sort of important way here, I really feel like they're just slowly catching up to what the actual people on the ground were saying. My favorite part of the convention was Obama's speech. I'm like a millennial Democrat, so I love Obama. Obama best. But Obama, when he does that line that says, you know, don't boo, vote, what I was thinking as I watched it, and for the first time I've heard him say that so many times, is that that's all Obama asks of me, is to vote. You know, he doesn't ask me to stop being friends with people because they have bad thoughts. He doesn't ask me to have purity tests in my social life. He doesn't ask me to use politics as a totalizing view of pop culture, of all of these things. He just says that, you know, the first Tuesday after the Monday in November, you go vote. And like, then you can go do other stuff. And like, that's honestly, I feel like the way that so many people in America just sort of feel, and them getting back to that, as opposed to this sort of, the Democrats getting back to that as opposed to this other view of this, everyone is an activist and we're all going to go and live our lives doing all of this, is popular. It's more normie. It's get back to that term.
Well, let me ask you this though. I mean, I guess the criticism is, and the question is, and obviously it's going to be the Trump campaign, is like, what is, they're not going to ask the question, they're going to kind of tell it, but the question is, what is her ideological core? I mean, is it the 2020, you know, decriminalize the border, you know, give money to BLM protesters that were arrested, no fracking, or is it, you know, the person who's reversing all of these? Does she have an ideological core, or is it purely what the zeitgeist of the moment is? And if she does have an ideological core, which of these two kind of strands is it?
I don't know what's in her heart. I don't think that I never really bought the one that she did in 2019, just because she didn't look like she did. She wasn't, like, as an actress, she wasn't selling it right, you know? But I also am not going to be so naive to say that this is actually what she believes now. I don't really, I feel that way about generally all the politicians. As long as she's disavowing flip-flopping in the direction that I think she should, and in the direction of public opinion, then I think it's good. Like, that's a good gravity to be pulled that way. It's bad when people don't do that, when people are like too stubborn. That was one of my fears with her, was that it's hard to flip-flop twice And sometimes people get too proud to do it. And like this involved her having to flip flop first in 2019 and then again now on all of that. But the fact that she's just wholesale been throwing out all of those awful opinions for 2019 is great. Wonderful.
Yeah.
As long as it happens like that. Because, I mean, there's going to be institutional reasons why she could not flip flop the other way again if in office. There will be lots of like constraints in Congress and courts and all of these things. And so, worst case scenario, those things will come in. But it's nice to know that she recognizes that America doesn't agree with those opinions.
Well, I mean, the other criticism is that, this has been a great month for her. The rollout has been surprisingly good. I would not have predicted it, but it's all an artifice because, she hasn't given an interview for a reason. That once you start, putting her in front of debate on a debate stage or in an interview, that they're avoiding, putting her in a place that is more difficult than reading off a teleprompter, which she did very well and better than I think a lot of people would have expected. What do you think the reason is that they're not doing interviews? I mean, it is kind of crazy. It's been a month. And what would you advise the campaign if you were a political advisor to the Harris campaign?
Presumably, they're going to change that now. I think that they thought for a while, like they could go through the convention and come up with a platform. Because I mean, they didn't even have a platform. They didn't have any. There was nothing. They had no issues or anything like that. And so I think that maybe that was one of the reasons why they were kicking the can down. But obviously now there's a ticking clock on it. Like, I mean, there's been a ticking clock on it for weeks actually. Like now, but now they need to do it. Like this week, we need to be seeing all of it. And if not, then I think it'll raise a lot more concerns about. Because I mean, give Trump this. Like he's always been quite good at going and doing the interview. Even no matter how it's going to go, he'll go and do it. And people respect people who go and do that.
In the debates, I mean, how do you? Trump's been pretty good. I'm not necessarily his answers, but he's a good performer. He understands how to get people, off their game in a certain way. At least he did in the Republican primaries in 2016. How does that debate go? I mean, she hasn't really been tested with someone. I mean, no one really has, like Donald Trump on a debate stage.
Yeah, I mean, and her debates in 2019 weren't great. She had some viral moments, but they weren't knockouts. I think that when I know this just for myself, when I think about her performances, I sort of forget that what I'm thinking back on are sort of during Senate committee hearings and things like that, which is a debate, but it's a one-sided debate, right, where you have all the time. I think it'll be interesting to see where it goes. Trump has only ever won one debate against a Democrat, though, and it required that Democrat to be having his brains leaking out of his nose. Like the other every other time that he lost to Hillary in debates. Hillary's not the best debater on earth, and I think that his thing that just plays differently with Republicans in general election. So I would imagine that it'll be. I don't want to be too confident about it because he did just knock out Biden he won so badly against Biden that Biden had to withdraw. But I think that she'll hold her own at least. She seems to be able to talk as much as she needs to without talking too much.
You mentioned that it's good that the directions he's flipping in, but do you get a sense of what she actually cares? Like when she's in the White House, if she's president, what are the issues that she actually cares about and are going to push? I mean, a president has a limited bandwidth to push certain things. What does she actually care about that she is going to push? It seems like not global warming for sure. I don't know if that was mentioned. I remember at one of the it must have been 2012 DNC where I calculated how many times that was brought up. But I mean, I didn't listen to every speech, but I didn't hear her mention that at all last night.
No, I mean, I love that. I think that I believe that Democrats should declare victory in global warming and just say in the future we just need small changes that can be dealt with at the appropriations level. No, America doesn't. The war is over. Okay, mission accomplished. But no, so yeah, definitely not that. I think that I've been told from various reports of people close to her that the emphasis is on, the earned income childhood tax credit and sort of strengthening families and all of these things that she can't do without Congress. I don't really know what that will look like if it's just executive actions and stuff like that. But beyond that, I don't have much of a sense of where her true, like when she's going to have to make a trade-off that every president does at some point between, the ACA, pushing the ACA, or pushing for, carbon tax. Well, she's never going to get either of those because she's not going to Congress. But like what that would be and what she would choose, I don't really know. And I think it's sort of why it's been sort of interesting watching her staff up with more Obama people than with Biden people, because the Biden people seemed a little captured by the left, and the Obama people at least kept. I wouldn't have said this a decade ago, I guess, when they were actually in power, but the Obama people have sort of a greater distance from it that makes it seem a little bit more distinct.
Yeah. Here's another way of getting about it. Who do you think's her House columnist? I mean, you have Tom Fried. It seems like Joe Biden reads Tom Friedman, maybe Mike Barnacle if he still writes or something. I mean, like those are the people he wakes up and like if he sees a negative thing, or David Ignatius, he probably calls him and say, "Why are you writing this about me?" Who is Kamala Harris, the vice president, reading or when she's president reading and caring what they say? Is there somebody out there?
I mean, I imagine that I would have said this person anyways, but I think Ezra Klein is probably someone like that. Aside from the fact that Ezra played quite a role in this whole thing happening, since he was one of the first people to call for Biden to step aside. But I remember, when they were releasing the vice president's visitor logs, she was meeting with all these journalists a year ago or something like that. And they were all from the same like coalition of black journalists, except for Ezra Klein. He was like the one white there. And you could see that, like, it's not to like focus on the race, but it was just like they were all clearly part of a group, and he was somebody that they were clearly like, well, let's bring Ezra. We love Ezra. And I think that he's become sort of the columnist of the New York Times set, who is a little bit younger, a little bit more, maybe a little further to the left, but also like came in the blog age, and also isn't far to the left anymore. Has progressively moved more center. So I think that he probably would be. And then once you say that, then there's various people like him, and you end up with John Chait, and you end up with Matt Glacius, and all of those people.
Yeah. Have you ever met her? I should have asked in the beginning. Have you ever met Kamala Harris?
No, I haven't.
Harris. People get really mad. I don't do it on purpose. I don't think I say the name correctly, so I try to say vice president.
I've been saying it wrong for up until quite recently when I finally got it right. But then, did you see the Slate article like a month ago that was like, she's not pronouncing it right either? Yeah. And so I was apparently I love that part yesterday where they had Kerry Washington do the how to pronounce the name thing, and I just kept thinking back to that Slate person who was so woke that she said that Kamala wasn't pronouncing her own name right, and I was like, oh, she's stewing.
Do you remember the era of the Bush era when then Chris Matthews, he would pronounce Cheney in a very different way and was saying this is the right way to say, and like Dick Cheney never pronounced it. It was like Cheney, or Cheney. But he was very confident that this was the way you said it, and he would correct people, even though the Cheneys themselves never corrected anybody. But yeah, I'm more, yeah. So I don't want to get in trouble for that. Here, we kind of touched on it a little bit on cancel culture, kind of the speech and where it goes from here. I mean, there is a series of things, part of which is we had a real problem with in DC, and it's all over. The crazy stuff that's being taught in elementary schools to like 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds, and the stuff that I saw, made. They were underplaying on Fox News what was going on in the schools. Do you think that era is ending? I mean, is this convention a signal that like the left is getting kind of that vintage, pushing that type of crazy stuff? In my opinion, failing. They're on the decline.
Wouldn't it be great if that is what happens? I mean, that was honestly like, that was how I felt. I loved the whole patriotic, doing so much, wrapping it in the flag and people being proud to love America. America's a great country. And yet we spend all these times with these woke kindergarten nonsense where people it's absurd. And I honestly think that the only times that those sort of intellectual left-wing movements ever gain power is when the like Dems act, like scared little kittens, and that only happens when Donald Trump, our mortal enemy, is president. So as long as if Trump wins, no, I don't know. It's all coming back. They're gonna rename Abraham Lincoln.
Was Trump an accelerationist? I mean, like without Trump, does the left get as much power as it did? Was he the fact that he was there that it accelerated them and gave them people just went crazy. So they kind of went to the people that were the most against him, and whatever their views were, they kind of adopted. It became a big coalition.
Totally. I mean, that's exactly what happened. I mean, if Hillary Clinton had won a squeaker, like it had just continued sort of Obama's third term with stuff like that, the left doesn't have any of that. We don't have to deal with that era of like Teen Vogue columnist that becomes the best person in America, the smartest left-wing socialists in America. You don't have to deal with the explosion of all of that stuff because they would stay just sort of like uninvited to these parties. Like they would just stay in the part of it where they were whining like Obama's second term about drone strikes. No one cared about it. Yeah. And honestly, like that. Yeah. But then I guess like the way that you just described it with the accelerationist things is what the left like to describe it as. They're like, oh, some people are like, we should let Trump win so that we can do this again. But like that doesn't actually get you anything because then when the votes are actually counted 4 years later, they still nominate Joe Biden. It's all discourse nonsense. And it's just discourse nonsense that hurts everyone and makes everyone a little less friendly to each other.
What do you think? I saw a little clip. I guess you were on the Reason podcast about October 7th. Well, my theory is that October 7th really has pushed back against it. A lot of people that were for these programs in theory, but didn't like really follow them, saw what they led to on campuses and were like, wait, what? Why are we supporting this? Do you think October 7th? I mean, and I'm hopeful. I'm not confident that these things are really on the decline, but to the extent that they are, my view is October 7th has played a role, and I'm kind of interested in your view on that.
Totally. I mean, I feel like one of the things that I have been most wrong about was about a decade ago or so. I kept saying, oh, it's just college kids. It's just going to stay. They're all stupid. And the fact is, it turns out that a lot of them kept their ideas when they went into the job market and sort of have like been from the bottom up. And then, but even then, you still have this temptation to say like, oh, they are just kids and they are maybe just on college. And then it was the response to October 7th that really was so bad and so numerous. It wasn't just some weirdos that you were reading about in a report. These were hundreds and thousands in various different places who you didn't have to read in a report. You could see them doing it. That I think really did make you have to reevaluate a lot of the things that were going on at these schools and what the hell they're doing. And I don't know. I don't know how the left entirely will come back from that anytime soon.
Well, so let me ask you this: paint a picture. If Donald Trump does win, what is the best case scenario in your view, him as president, and what is the worst case scenario? What is the doomsday scenario?
I mean, the best case scenario is I think that like not much happens, and that essentially there's no tail risks that come out, and he's stopped by the courts, and maybe he extends his tax cuts and something like that. There's some appointees, but essentially there's no crisis, and it's all. And also, like that's probably what happens, right? Just because that's the way risks work. Yeah. But the bad part would be that the courts are a little more pliant. He gets away with a little more things. That there is some sort of crisis that happens that maybe we end up in something where it does matter that he can, sort of spout things off without much thinking, and that you end up in either closer to serious war situations or that he actually tanks the economy with these awful tariffs even worse than it is. And I don't think that the concerns about him like staying on for a third term are realistic, and I've never really understood the people on the like sort of conspiratorial he's going to be a dictator thing has never really made a lot of sense to me. But I could see a situation where he has so done well with the party that he's able to sort of designate a successor, and then there's more influence and he can have JD Vance maybe one day be doing well, and that would be terrible. But yeah, I think that in reality, what's probably going to happen would be what happened in the last one. We'd muddle through okay until there was a crisis, and then maybe he wouldn't handle it well. But there's the tail risks of other things happening, which I think are just increased with him more than anyone else.
Let me just close on this, asking you about Substack as a future. I'm intrigued by it. A lot of great writers are now on it. But is it? I wonder, like, what is your thought? Is this like the future, or is it just? I mean, it feels like almost like the Hulu and all that stuff has become. It was supposed to be like the opposite of cable, but now it seems like everyone's bundling packages, and it's become just a very different version of cable. Is that what Substack's going to become? What does the future of journalism look like?
I mean, if Substack somehow resists going to the bundle, it'll be remarkable because it'll be unprecedented. Because, like, you're absolutely right. Every time that they try to unbundle things, they inevitably start trying to bundle them again. I don't know. Substack, it feels so new, but then at the same time, it's been 5 years or something like that since it started doing this. And when you think back to the era of journalism that sort of changed it entirely, of that time where people talk about like Facebook throwing things into the funnel, and increasing the number of people following politics and everything like that. That entire era was 3 years long. That like it wasn't it completely changed everything and gave us BuzzFeed and then killed BuzzFeed and did all these things and changed all these places. But it was really 2013 to 2016. And Substack's actually, like, when you then look at it, you go, oh, it's been 5 years and the bubble hasn't burst yet. I still think it would be sort of silly to be confident in the future of it because everything's always changing. But I do think it's been. I don't know how people were able to be journalists outside of staff jobs before. It sounds impossible unless you're Michael Lewis and you're paid $10 a word.
Yeah, well, he had a staff job for a little bit at the New Republic.
Oh, really?
Michael Lewis? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where he wrote while at. You know what? I don't know if he was on staff. I know he did freelance there. That's where he started Losers, which was one of the great books of campaign politics. But with that, Ben Dreyfuss, thank you for joining the Dispatch podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I love you guys.